The United States is facing serious backlash after an operation that led to the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Members of the United Nations Security Council, including some countries that usually stand with Washington, have openly criticized the move. The United Nations says the operation crosses a dangerous line and clearly violates a basic rule of international law. But despite the outrage, U.S. President Donald Trump isn't backing down. He's described the operation as brilliant and has even hinted that more military action against Venezuela could follow.
What's also catching attention is the silence from few African leaders. Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has not said anything publicly, even as the controversy continues to grow. That silence has raised eyebrows. Some analysts believe Tinubu may be trying not to rock the boat with Trump, especially at a time when Nigeria is already under scrutiny over U.S. claims of Christian persecution in the country. So before we break down the latest twists in the situation, here's a quick look at how the U.S.-Venezuela face-off has gone down. Here's what you should know.
President Nicolás Maduro and his wife were captured by United States forces and flown to New York to face U.S. drug-related charges on January 3rd, 2026, and after the U.S. launched a large-scale military operation in Venezuela. Relations between Washington and Caracas have been hostile for years over oil, ideology, and alleged drug trafficking. The United States government had repeatedly sanctioned Maduro's leadership, accused it of corruption and narco-terrorism, and targeted Venezuelan vessels. Great tensions peaked as Trump claims Maduro's rule was illegitimate and harmful to U.S. interests.
After Maduro's removal, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was declared interim president by Venezuela's Supreme Court and backed by parts of the military. Though her legitimacy is contested and she initially rejected U.S. control, Rodriguez has since expressed willingness to cooperate with the U.S. under diplomatic terms. Now, that's what we do want you to know. Meanwhile, Maduro has pleaded not guilty in court, by the way, and his case has also been adjourned. Well, joining us now to discuss the implications of these events is global affairs analyst Collins Nweke joins us this morning. Thank you for being here this morning.
Very good morning to you.
All right. The U.S. says Maduro has no immunity covering him under any international law because he is an illegitimate president of Venezuela, following accusations of rigged elections. But the UN disagrees. Others also say Trump's move interferes with Venezuela's sovereignty. As a global affairs analyst, you've looked at this from the global aspect. What does this mean?
This means that if this action is allowed to stand, that it sends a very, very bad signal that the world is going back to the Stone Ages, where survival of the fittest is actually the norm. So which means that if you are powerful enough, you have the wherewithal, you can just, bump into any country that you don't like what is happening there, invade them, and nothing happens. Respect for international law must be universal. Whether the crisis is in Caracas, Tripoli, or any other country, even, the same rules of sovereignty and law should apply. Selective application of, force undermines unilateral, institutions. And I am happy to hear Jeffrey Sachs actually speak. He briefed the United Nations yesterday, and equally glad to, see that the United Nations has actually taken a very, very unequivocal position as far as this is concerned. So that is a counter signal that the world should not allow this violation of international law to hold.
So the question now is, if from what you're saying, the U.S. has violated international laws, I mean, the UN, the United Nations has provided, the Charter provides that for any country to be able to attack any other sovereign nation, that it has to be one self-defense or there has to be a resolution by the United Nations Security Council. Neither of these terms were met. So if judging by this, the US has flouted the UN Charter. Yesterday we had a guest who says the US is not subject to the UN Charter. So who checks the US?
Well, the US was supposed to be checked by international law. But as we have seen under the current president, he just doesn't care. Like I said, he just carries on doing as he pleases. The first step to be taken based on, implementation of international law is for the United Nations to converge like they did yesterday, receive briefings, and then, make a pronouncement. That is the first step. And under normal circumstances, of course, this situation with Donald Trump is far from normal, but under normal circumstances, the president of the United States is supposed to take the UN declaration into consideration and begin to do what? To rescind, in terms of not taking any further actions, in violation of international law. But, of course, we can, safely predict that he's simply going to toss that around and, carry on, just as he pleases.
And this sets a dangerous precedent, Mr. Collins Nweke. You're speaking to us from the capital of the European Union in Brussels, where the European Parliament sits. And the response from Europe, who are traditional allies of the United States, have been pretty muted and very guarded. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, she didn't criticize them, the other countries. Keir Starmer, who happens to be an international lawyer, a lawyer of international law, is saying he's studying the situation. They need to get all the details. Well, we know they went in the dead of the night, kidnapped the sitting head of state and his wife, and extraordinarily renditioned them to the United States. So what does this signal? Because the allies, the Europeans, they are not bold enough to even condemn this. And then Trump is more brazen. You have senior government officials talking about, taking Greenland as if it's some manifest destiny. What sort of signal does this take? And do you think he's going to stop at Venezuela? Does this empower him when his allies can't even tell him the truth?
That's exactly the point, Wenga, because, if this is allowed to happen in Caracas, it can also happen in Abuja, Tripoli, or any other capital of the world. And yes, the EU actually, taking, this kind of foot-dragging, approach is something that is visible to us with our mortal eyes. Now, I do not imagine that the EU will continue to, take this kind of, non-allied position. It is untenable because, the European Union has spent the better part of 2 decades building a foreign policy identity around, a simple promise that power should be constrained by law. And that law is international law to which United States and other major nations of the world are signatories to and are obliged to respect that. And, crisis should be resolved through principled multilateralism. And so that means that, as a matter of fact, it shouldn't have been, Donald Trump and United States acting unilaterally. If there were issues, they should have been, tabled before the UN and, something done about it. Now, these are the norms that the European Union, has built over the past, decades. Now, can we imagine that at this time when it matters most, at this time when at their backyard here in Ukraine, they are fighting exactly the same, invasion of a sovereign nation, that the the EU can afford to speak from both sides of their mouth. I just don't know how they are going to do that. So I can only imagine that what is happening right now is that, backdoor diplomacy is, the backroom diplomacy rather, is taking place, and that, the EU is prevailing silently on Donald Trump to actually de-escalate and do things the right way. And, being their ally, that at some point he might either listen to them or they will be forced to do the right thing, which is condemn this and then set a democratic process in place in Caracas.
All right. If we go back to 1989, when the U.S. sent forces into Panama to capture Manuel Noriega, the president of Panama, based on similar reasons with Maduro, we've seen this happen. We've seen this happen more than once, right? And now it's happened again. There are people who support this. There have been people who criticize this. ECOWAS does not seem to be in support of this. I want us to bring this back home to Nigeria, because I would assume that the implication of this is that we can wake up one day and hear that, for whatever reason, they can come into Nigeria and decide to, capture our president.
Just the day we woke up on Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, we don't hope for that, but we saw what happened on the 24th of December. And with the way we've been on shaky waters, let's talk about what the short-term and long-term implication of this conversation is for Nigeria.
Well, for Nigeria, I mean, I heard your opening reports that talked about the fact that, quite a number of countries, including traditional allies of the United States, have actually spoken out. Nigeria's silence has been deafening. Now, does that mean that Nigeria is actually standing with the United States on this? I doubt it. Now, the only reasonable thing, the only logical thing that I can imagine that Nigeria is doing right now is actually not going silo on this, but rather trying to, get the AU as a bloc, as a regional bloc, to actually take a collective position, for the entire continent. If that is the case, well, then I have nothing but applause for, the government of Nigeria, because come to think of it, over the years, the AU has actually managed to, develop, quite some doctrines, which is actually included in the, Lomé Convention and, the act actually establishing the AU. And the Africa has actually, been a recipient of, this sort of thing. So, coming closer to your question, I mean, what happens now and what might happen later? I mean, what happens now is that, yes, something is already happening. On Christmas Day, the U.S., like we were told, in collaboration with, the government of Nigeria, invaded, sent a bomb to Sokoto. Okay. In this case, we cannot talk of violation of international law because, they got the consent of the host country. But, and I mean, assuming that is actually the case. Now, not speaking out, not demanding for international law to be respected here means that it could be Nigeria's turn tomorrow. It could happen to Kenya. It could happen to Uganda. So there is a very good reason for all nations of the world to stand up in condemnation of this.
All right. During the UN meeting, Professor Jeffrey Sachs had highlighted the many concerns that this single action has caused the world. He did call it a global anarchy. He also talked about testing the waters with the United Nations Charter as well. He did say what Trump has done would either signal if it's relevant or irrelevant. He also mentioned that we live in a world where there's a nuclear action, so people can react and unreact, and this would actually befall heavily on humanity. But in your complete view of this, looking at his statement, he had called for a peaceful demonstration or a peaceful way to handle this situation. But as we speak this morning, President Trump had put out a tweet just yesterday by our own time, stating that Venezuela has agreed to give the United States of America 50 million barrels of crude oil. So it makes one wonder, was this really about drugs or was it about petrodollar?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Joe, because what we have to understand here is that Venezuela's oil is an asset, but without governance, oil becomes a cost, not a blessing. Now, in this case, it is becoming a cost because no matter whatever reason, whatever excuse you trump up, to invade a country, in this case, drug trafficking and all of that. I'm not going to speak or speculate about that because we don't have the intelligence that they have. But let's assume the worst case scenario, that is the case. I mean, it is not for you as America to go it all by yourself. And so, talking about, their eyes being on oil, and even talking previously of running, and those are his words, running, Venezuela, only tells us that, the target here is the, oil resources out of Venezuela, and that is completely despicable.
Okay, I would like our directors to put up that truth post by President Trump last night here. It says, I'm pleased to announce that the interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality sanctioned oil to the United States. The oil will be sold at its market price, and the money will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America. I think we can stop there, and I'll go straight to my question. Mr. Collins Nweke, these are unprecedented charters. I mean, this could happen before the League of Nations was created in 1945, and in the age of colonization, not too many people will bat an eyelid. But this is 2026, where we speak of an international rule-based order, and then you have the President of the United States of America openly and brazenly come up with such a statement. Is this not outright piracy, extortion, and theft? I mean, followed by the kidnapping of a sitting head of state, unprecedented charters, and where would this lead the world to? Because it means, might is right.
Might is right, and like I, said earlier, it just brings us back to the dark ages when, if you have the might, if you can do it, you just go ahead, to do it, and that is not, where the world should be gravitating towards. Venezuela represents, triple crisis. Okay, we've heard of political legitimacy, economic collapse, and humanitarian distress. Now, it could very well be that all of these have, been long in coming in terms of, America tightening their grip through sanctions on the country, making the economy collapse. I'm talking about 70% over the past decade. The economy has declined with more than 70%. So while the removal of President Maduro has been presented as a breakthrough, history, the very history that you cited, teaches us that leadership change without institutional repair rarely delivers stability. Now, as we speak, demonstrations and all of that are still going on. Repression of, journalists is actually taking place, I too and I speak, by the newly sworn in, president. So there is no stability there. What matters now is whether Venezuela transitions towards inclusive governance through lawful negotiated processes rather than imposed outcomes because there is oil there to exploit.
All right. Very insightful conversation we've had with you, global affairs analyst, Mr. Collins Oweke. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll have you back because we'll be expecting more developments, especially now that the President of the United States has mentioned about the oil deal, which has been signed and will be managed by him for the benefit of the United States people and that of Venezuela. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.